Yes, would you ask Mr. Lamb to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Lamb, ready to carry on?
Yes, certainly am.
Very good, thank you. Yes, Miss Grange.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lamb. Just going back to that first meeting that you had with Ray Bailey and Daniel Anketell-Jones on the 12th of August 2014. Was there any discussion at that meeting about the fact that your main experience prior to that had been in glazing and curtain walling rather than in cladding? Was that discussed at all?
No, there was no discussion to that point, no.
Did you understand that they knew that they were aware that that had been predominantly your expertise?
I don't think it was important because I was being engaged as a drafting resource rather than a cladding specialist.
I see. Okay. Now, we were looking at, or topic I was exploring was kind of quality control processes internally within Harley in relation to your work and the supervision of your work. Certainly at the beginning, how would you describe the division of responsibility between yourself and Mr. Anketell-Jones?
Well, as I said, we would have around the table concept design meetings.
Yeah.
Following those meetings, I was entrusted to carry out instructions, and then for expedience, the drawings would be sent straight out to the client, but they would be copied into Dan and Ray for their input should they see fit.
Yeah. Did you understand that Daniel Anketell-Jones was your line manager on the project?
Yes.
Yeah. Were there ever any formal or informal design reviews held internally within the Harley design team? Did you ever kind of draw a line in the sand and say, right, let's just take stock? Where has the design got to? Where are we going? What's next? Did that ever happen on this project?
Well, as I said, the weekly or every other weekly round the table design workshops would cover that, wouldn't they?
When you say the weekly or other weekly design workshops, do you mean these discussions with Dan and Ray?
Yes.
But those weren't held later in the project, were they?
No, but by then the concept was all secured.
I see. So there were no design opportunities for design review later.
There was opportunities if we felt it necessary.
But you didn't?
But no.
No. Okay. What about any formal or informal design reviews with the wider team, with Studio E or anybody at Ryden, the design team, to ensure that the design was progressing correctly?
We did have a few design team meetings on site. Yes.
Yeah. And that's what you thought that was, an opportunity during those meetings to take stock of the design.
Yes.
With Studio E. If we can turn to a document HAR 403634. So this is, if we look at the top email here, this is an email from Daniel Anketell-Jones to you on the 22nd of September 2014. And he says, Kev, could you make one change, detail 304, change it to 2 angles in the shadow gap to allow for tolerance. These can be issued then. Do you see that there?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So it appears, certainly at this stage, that Daniel Anketell-Jones is reviewing your drawings, making comments and then approving them. Is that correct?
Certainly in this particular case, yes.
Yeah. When he was doing that, certainly at the beginning of the project, what did you understand he was checking for?
He was checking that I was following the Harley remit.
I see.
I was instructed by Harley to provide a particular design.
Yeah.
He was checking that was okay.
That you were following that. Did you think he was doing any wider form of checking, for example, checking with building regulations or relevant guidance?
I wouldn't have expected him to be doing that. I would expect him, if he knew that there was an obvious departure from conformance to regulations, to bring that up. But I don't think that was his primary job function, no.
But would you have expected him to have been aware of the regulatory requirements surrounding the design of facades, the building regulations requirements, and other guidance?
I never considered it. The problem is we're talking about what I know now.
Yeah,
At the time, didn't have any reason to consider any of that.
no. But I think you've confirmed that if there was something obvious in your drawings that wasn't compliant, you would have expected Mr. Anketell-Jones to pick that up.
Yes, as with any other member of the team that sees the drawings.
Yeah. So that the same would apply for Ray Bailey if he reviewed one of your drawings. You would have expected him to have picked up any obvious non-compliances with requirements.
Yeah, if it's obvious,
Yeah. Now, you say in paragraph 32 of your witness statement, let's go to this, so HAR 30-10419 at page 9. So if we look at paragraph 32, and I want to look the fourth line down at the top of the page. We read this earlier. You said later on, if there was a significant change or an issue came up, I would speak to Ray Bailey about this. And you say in the next sentence that you recalled Daniel becoming less involved quite early on in the job as he was working on other projects, yes?
Yes.
Can you help us as to how soon exactly in the project did Mr. Anketell-Jones become less involved? At what point?
I would be guessing it would be easy to check back on emails and see when I stopped issuing emails to him and favoured Mark Stapley. But I would guess in the early couple of months of 15.
Right. And were you told at that point that another design manager was supervising your work at that stage?
There was a point at which I was told no longer to send the drawings through Dan, to send them through Mark Stapley.
I see. And but you can't help us as to exactly when you were told that?
Not without having a look through all the files, no.
Do you think that would be on an email, or were you told that verbally?
Oh no, I would have been told that verbally.
I see. Is it right that as the project progressed, you were increasingly left to issue drawings without having had direct supervision?
Yes, because the level of drawings, it was basically comments from the architect that I was dealing with.
Yeah.
So the concept had already been agreed with my client being Harley.
Yeah.
So there was no need.
Yeah. So you weren't concerned by that?
No.
No. Now, just an example of that, if we turn to SEA 13350, if we can blow that up. So this is from you to Simon Lawrence on the 18th of August 2015. So fairly late on in the project.
Yeah.
You're still copying Daniel Anketell-Jones in there, as well as Mark Stapley. We see that in the copy list. So does that mean this was at a time when you did understand Daniel was still having some involvement?
Yes, he must have been. So that does put the date back a little bit further, doesn't it? Yeah.
And we can see a large number of drawings here. And you actually address the body of your email to Neil Crawford, I think. You say, Neil, please find attached curtain wall drawings, all now issued for construction based on your comments, 7th of August 15, the only item that has deviated. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
We're going to come in a little while to drill down and try and understand the exact process for approving drawings and whether it was Ryden approving them or Harley approving them. But at this stage, I just wanted to note that you seem to be issuing a large number of drawings here to Ryden and Studio E without having run them past Harley first.
But these are revisions.
I see. So
You can see by the fact after the final three numbers, there's a letter.
yeah.
Revision A in most cases. So you can see they're all revisions.
So is the point that given they were only revisions, they didn't need to go back internally within Harley, they could go straight out again to Ryden and Studio E?
Directly.
Yeah.
Of course, they were copied into the team for
Yeah.
review at their leisure.
I see. If we turn to another email, HAR 404435, this is an email from Ray Bailey to you This is the 16th of August 2015, so again quite late on in the project, and we just have Ben Bailey there copied in. Do you see that there?
Yes, yep.
And we can see him saying in the beginning of that email, "Hi Kevin, I've been looking at Grenfell and I'm extremely concerned about getting completed. The completion date is 23rd of October, which is just 9 weeks away. This means that we have to start removing mass climbers in 6 weeks. As I understand it, there is still a large amount of fabrication details to be issued. Once these are issued, the material has to be manufactured and then installed." And then he has a number of topics that he goes through, which we don't need to look at in detail. One of those is the crown. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Crown details need to be released. Would it be usual to still be issuing fabrication drawings only 9 weeks before completion?
Yes, yeah, quite
That's
common. Yeah.
common on projects, is it?
Yes, yeah.
So there was nothing unusual about this occurring?
No, not at all, no.
Would you agree that Mr. Bailey does seem concerned? He says extremely concerned about getting completed.
I would imagine he suddenly realised there was a date for the mast climbers to be removed,
Yeah,
and that's probably focused him to speak to all members of the team to make sure everyone's going to get their works completed in time.
yeah. Was this a project, looking back on it, that became rushed as the project neared its end, from your perspective?
No, I don't believe so.
So you don't think that affected the quality of the designs that were
No,
produced?
not at all.
No. Now, I want to come on to the kind of the general regulatory requirements and look at a number of topics relevant to that. First up, can we just consider your CV briefly? This is HAR 405325. So this is your CV.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recognise that there?
Yeah.
And we can see in the role that you say you're designer of curtain walling and associated facade elements to include GA. Is that general arrangement design
That's correct.
proposals?
Mm-hmm.
Fabrication drawings and material scheduling?
Yeah.
What does material scheduling mean?
That's lists of quantities and sizes of materials that need to be ordered.
I see, yeah. Site meetings and surveys undertaken, liaison with internal, external design teams and specialists, understanding of commercial implications. So we've got all that there. And in that beginning of that paragraph, I note we've got designer of curtain walling. Should we note the emphasis on curtain walling there, as
Yeah.
opposed to designer of curtain walling and cladding?
Well, it's not exclusive, but that is my main line of business.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that you presented yourself as having a range of skills that one would expect from a main designer of a facade?
Yes.
As a professional designer of facades, do you agree that it was important that you kept up to date with relevant changes in the industry, including industry practice and guidance?
Not specifically. As a lead designer, I would say yes, but I was never purporting to be a lead designer. I was a drafting resource.
Yeah. So does that mean you didn't think it was necessary for you to keep up to date with industry guidance on facades?
Not specifically, but that's not to say I didn't in certain areas.
No. Can you recall what steps did you take when you were working on the Grenfell project to ensure that you understood what the relevant regulatory requirements were?
Again, it wasn't my responsibility to provide this sort of backup for Harley. However, during the course of Grenfell, I did take recourse to refresh myself in certain areas of ADB.
ADB?
Yeah.
Anything else that you looked at?
I had a brief look at the use of Celotex over 18 metres.
Yeah.
And a brief look at CWCT, the guidance for, I can't remember the title, but basically it's for your cladding requirements.
Yeah. So you knew at the time that there was guidance that you could access out there.
Oh, yes.
If you wanted further detail in a
Yeah.
particular area. And including on fire performance and the fire performance of facades, did you have an awareness of that?
Fire performance of facades.
Yeah, that there was industry guidance out there that would provide guidance on the design of facades from a fire perspective.
I was aware of things like BR 135.
Yeah,
But again, my role wasn't to investigate all this to the nth degree.
yeah,
I was part of a technical team.
yeah. In practice, did you ever, in fact, analyse the design as provided in Studio E's drawings to check for compliance with relevant regulatory requirements?
Not in general, but when we got to the question of cavity barriers, I did put a little bit of effort in, yes.
Yeah. When you received the full set of Studio E drawings, I think you're sent a first big pack in August 2014, did you undertake any interrogation or investigation of those designs before you yourself began work in developing that design?
No, nothing jumped out at me as requiring any concern.
So would it be fair to say that you adopted the work that they had already produced?
That's correct, yes. And of course, this is a work that Harley's had already signed up to before I was even employed.
When you say it's work that Harley's had already signed up to, do you mean that your understanding was that Harley would have looked at the Studio E drawings and satisfied themselves before they engaged you that the designs were compliant with relevant requirements?
Maybe not fully compliant, but they certainly spent a lot of time looking at these designs so as they were able to provide a competitive quotation.
And you would have expected them, as part of that process, would you, to have picked up any compliance issues?
Not necessarily, no.
No. But any obvious compliance issues?
Obvious ones, yes.
Yeah. Now, we know you were also sent some preliminary design work that Sam Anketell-Jones and Ray Bailey had been working on. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Did you analyse their work for compliance with relevant regulatory requirements?
There was nothing to analyse.
Okay. Were you sent either the whole of or parts of the NBS specification that had been drafted by Studio E?
I certainly had some of the MBS. Whether I had all of it, I don't know.
Let's just have a look at that. So if we go to SEA 50169, that was the front page of the NBS spec. It was a very long document because it had lots of different work packages in it.
Yeah.
But if we go to the rain screen cladding part, that's at page 64. So there's an H92 section. I think it's just disappeared from the bottom of the page. It's around 11 pages, this section. Do you recall seeing this H92 section of the NBS?
I don't recall specifically, but I would have imagined this was part of my part of the information that was issued to me. Generally, elements of the NBS spec would be issued to the subcontractor that apply to their works. So you might get the H11, the L10, the L20, H92.
Yeah.
Because they all refer to different elements on the project, but they wouldn't be getting elements referred to groundworks or internal.
Yeah.
Works. That would just be too confusing.
Yeah. So looking at this now, do you think it's likely that you were provided with some aspects of the H92 section?
Yeah, quite probably, yeah.
That bit that's there on the screen shows that contractors had to submit alternative supply and install costs for different rain screen materials.
This was at tender stage, yes.
Yeah.
Way before I was involved, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Anketell-Jones has said that he didn't review the NBS specification. Would you expected him to have done that?
What, review for compliance?
Well, read it and understood it. He's said that wasn't part of his role.
Harley, as an entity, would have,
Yeah.
without a doubt. Now, different members may have read different elements. Certainly, Mike Albiston would have had to read elements to ensure he was pricing the right elements. Mark Harris would have probably done the same. Ray may have read other areas But it would have been read.
Yes, but just my question was whether you would have expected Mr. Anketell-Jones as design manager to have read this H92 section.
I wouldn't necessarily. I wouldn't say one way or the other, to be honest.
I see. Can we turn on to page 68 within the NBS spec? And I want to look first at item 210. So here we get the general requirements and preparatory work in H92, and it says design in 210, and it says range screen cladding system and associated features, and then it says complete detailed design in accordance with this specification and the preliminary design drawings, and submit before commencement of fabrication. Do you see that there?
Yes. Yeah.
So this seems to be envisaging that detailed design work would be done by either Ryden or its subcontractors.
Yeah.
And then at 220 on the same page, just down specification, we can see it says compliance standards, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, standard for systemised building envelopes. Do you see that there?
Yeah, it's quite normal.
Yeah. And it talks about it again just below. And I think that's a standard that's mentioned a few times in this MBS spec. Were you aware at the time you were working on the project that the facade had to comply with that CWCT guidance?
Yes.
You were?
Yeah.
We know that was dated March 2008. So do you think you looked at that CWCT guidance during the course of the Grenfell project?
I certainly did.
Yeah. So does it follow that you did consider how you would ensure that your design complied with the CWCT standard?
I was not really looking to that degree. It was when we got to the discussion around cavity barriers that I looked to this for guidance, and this combined with ADB didn't really point me in a very positive direction.
So just to be clear, you wouldn't have looked at this guidance before you had recourse to look at it in the context of cavity barriers?
No.
Now, the building regulations, at the time of the Grenfell project, were you familiar with Schedule 1 to the building regulations and, in broad terms, the functional requirements that it set out?
Broadly, yeah.
Can you explain what you understood by a functional requirement?
Well, no, I can't.
Did you understand that set effectively a performance that, say, an external wall would need to meet?
Yes, I can understand that, yes.
Rather than a prescriptive standard. And what about Part B, fire safety in Schedule 1? Were you aware that Part B broke down into functional requirements B1 to B5?
Yes.
And were you aware that there was requirement B4 relating to the external wall?
That is very pertinent to what we were doing there, yes.
Yes. And can you help us as to what your understanding was of what the B4 requirement was at the time?
Well, it's requirements to protection against fire.
Protection against fire?
Yes, on the exterior of the building.
What about that the external wall shall adequately resist the spread of fire?
That's correct, yeah.
Across the walls and from one building to another?
Yes, yeah.
You understood that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Can we look then at approved document B? This is CLG 50224. So this is approved document B. It's the 2006 edition, which incorporates various amendments, and this one has the 2013 amendments. So this would have been the version of approved document B at the time you were working on the Grenfell project.
Yeah.
What was your understanding of the purpose of ADB, of this document?
To ensure compliance.
To ensure compliance?
Yes.
Did you understand that it was intended to give practical guidance on how to meet the obligations under the building regulations?
Yes, I understand that's what the intention was, yeah.
And at the time of the Grenfell project, so let's take when you start working in August 2014, how familiar were you with ADB?
It was a document I would refer to
Yeah.
occasionally on many jobs over the years.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know it explicitly.
No.
I would just use it to refer to.
Yeah. And when you would refer to it, how would you look at it? Would you have a hard copy? Would you look at it electronically?
I would look electronically.
Yeah. Had you ever attended a course or any similar training that provided education on ADB and its requirements?
No.
When you were working on the design of a facade, would it normally include some element of checking approved document B? Was that a commonplace thing to do?
If I was in doubt about anything, or if the architectural information provided seemed poor,
Yeah.
then I may refer to this
Yeah.
just as a process, so that I could return to the architect and say, "Have you done your designs
Yeah.
this in mind?"
Yeah. So would you say that was a common occurrence on jobs you've been involved in before Grenfell, or was that the exception?
A common occurrence that I would refer to it,
Yeah.
but relatively rare that I would put it back to the architect that I feel is not complying.
Yeah. Now, if we go on within this document to page 93, we see the B4 requirements set out. So there we have the functional requirement B41, which we were just discussing, adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to the height, use and position of the building. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then those aspects are dealt with in section 12, construction of external walls of ADB. And if we turn to page 95, if we look at the bottom half of that page, in the right-hand column, external wall construction, 12.5, the first paragraph reads, the external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The use of combustible materials in the cladding system and extensive cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, is that something you were aware of at the time of the Grenfell project?
In general, anyway, yes.
In general, anyway. So
Yeah.
that was just something you
You
felt
wouldn't-
was obvious, did you?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And that the use of combustible materials in the cladding system might present a risk in tall buildings. Were you specifically aware of that?
Yes. Yeah.
And then it says this in the next paragraph, external walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9, those appear below, or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, fire performance of external thermal insulation for walls of multi-storey buildings, BR 135, for cladding systems using full-scale test data from BS 8414. Do you see that there?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's providing here two routes, either a route through paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or the BR 135 route.
Right.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I agree with that.
And did you understand that at the time of the Grenfell project?
I don't think I gave it a second thought, to be honest, because I was given the build-up of the construction from my client. As an experienced cladding company, I had no reason to doubt that it would be compliant anyway.
I see, yeah. So does that mean that you didn't know on the Grenfell project whether the route to compliance was through the paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or through BR 135? You didn't know that at the time?
No.
And that wasn't something that would have occurred to you to check?
Not at all, no.
Paragraph 12.6 then, that starts at the bottom of that page, says the external surfaces of walls should meet the provisions in diagram 40. Do you see that there?
Yes, yeah.
Now, at Grenfell, that talks about external surfaces of walls. Which aspect of the external wall at Grenfell did you think was classed as the external surface?
It was the cladding.
The cladding?
Yes.
The rain screen cladding?
That's correct, yeah.
So the outer panels.
That's right.
Were you familiar at the time of the Grenfell project with diagram 40 of ADB?
Yes, the one where it shows the different heights of buildings and different proximities.
Yeah, it's on the next
Too.
page. Let's go
Yeah.
to that. So this is at page 97. There it is.
Yeah.
Did you know which of these sketches applied at Grenfell?
Yes, it was the bottom right.
Yeah. And were you aware, therefore, that any dimension over 18 metres needed to be Class 0 national class or Class B, S3, D2 or better?
Yes. Yeah.
Were you familiar with National Class 0 as a classification for building materials?
Yes, yeah.
What did you understand National Class 0 to mean?
It means a product that does not promote the spread of flame across its surface.
Did you understand what testing a material would have had to have undergone to meet the Class 0 classification?
I didn't need to know that. I would rely on documentation if it came to it.
So does it follow that you didn't know that it was the BS 476 Part 6 and 476 Part 7 tests that fed into the Class 0 classification?
No.
In your mind, what was the significance of a material having Class 0?
It's not going to promote fire.
And what materials did you think Class 0 was relevant to in an external wall?
I think in the case of Grenfell and any other cladding project, it would be from the concrete face of the existing building outwards.
So all those elements in the external wall,
That's right.
you thought Class 0 was relevant to?
There are exceptions that you're allowed to use, but the major elements, yeah, would all have to be Class 0.
And would you ever check that each element of the wall had Class 0?
No, because I was provided with the materials that had been selected,
Yeah,
and I had no reason to doubt that they were Class O
Right.
or otherwise.
yeah. Was that a phrase you were aware of that was used regularly in the construction industry at the time, Class 0?
Yes, yeah.
Had you undertaken any form of professional development or training in relation to the testing and classification of building products?
No.
Was it ever your practice to examine the testing evidence that you were presented with in order to ensure it complied with the guidance in Approved Document B?
No, not at all.
That was not part of your job?
No.
Now, in Approved Document B, we'll come back to Section 12 in a moment. I just want to look now at what the definition is of Class 0 at page 122. And this is in paragraph 13, which is halfway down on the left-hand side of that column. And it says the highest national product performance classification for lining materials is Class 0. This is achieved if a material or the surface of a composite product is either, and you've got two routes to getting Class 0, either it's composed throughout of materials of limited combustibility or it's undergone certain other testing. Do you see that there?
Yes, yeah.
And that second part is referring to the BS 476 Part 6 and 7 testing. But you wouldn't have been aware of that.
No.
But looking at that first part, saying it's the highest national product performance classification for lining materials, is that something you were aware of? That the Class 0 was primarily a classification that was concerned with lining materials?
No.
No, you weren't aware of that. Did you think that Class 0 meant a material couldn't burn?
I don't think I considered its flammability. I did know that it wouldn't promote flame across its surface.
Okay. Then if we can go back within section 12 of ADB to look at paragraph 12.7 on page 96. And we see here there's a heading, insulation materials / products. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And it says this: in a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. See Appendix A. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, at the time of the Grenfell project, were you familiar with that paragraph of Approved Document B?
I couldn't say one way or the other.
You couldn't say.
No.
Had you heard at the time of the Grenfell project of the term limited combustibility?
Yes, yeah.
What was your understanding of what limited combustibility meant?
Well, it's limited the amount of flame it would promote.
I see. So your understanding was it that limited combustibility was like a description of how much combustibility there was?
That's right, yeah.
Did you understand at this time that for a material to be of limited combustibility, it had to have achieved certain passes in certain tests?
Oh, well, I would imagine so, yes, yeah.
If we look, it refers to Appendix A. I want to look at Table A7, page 132. So this is Table A7, use and definitions of materials of limited combustibility. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So this is a guide to when something is going to be of limited combustibility. And what we get down the left-hand side is various references in ADB where limited combustibility is said to be needed. And if you look at item 8 down that list, do you see that?
Yeah.
It's got insulation material in external wall construction referred to in paragraph 12.7. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, did you ever look at this table A7 during or prior to the Grenfell project?
If I did, it wasn't in depth. I would have just glossed over it.
And what we see is that the definition of materials of limited combustibility for insulation material in external walls is either something that you get classified under the national class system, and it's usually involving tests under BS 476 Part 11, or under the European class system, it's any materials in A and B above, which are basically A1 or A2 materials. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
On the European classifications, were you familiar with A1, A2, B, C, D? Did that mean anything to you?
No, not at all, no.
So in diagram 40, which we looked at earlier, there was reference to class B.
But yes, but it was also mentioning class 0.
It was.
So
It was.
that's the point that would jump out and imply conformity.
Would it be fair to say that at the time of the Grenfell project, you weren't aware that insulation products needed to be of limited combustibility if following this guidance, and that had a special definition?
Yeah, I knew they had to be class O, but I didn't specifically know they had to be limited combustibility at the time.
Yeah. So if you were told, well, this insulation product is class 0, would you think that was all you needed to know in terms of whether it could be used in an external wall above 18 metres?
It's kind of immaterial because I wasn't, my remit wasn't to consider the materials that were specified for the job.
Sure, but we'll come on and look at it in due course, and I think you confirmed in your evidence that you did have a look at the Celotex specification guide for the insulation, and I'm just keen to understand exactly what you had understood about ADB prior to that. Is that okay?
That's fine.
BR135, can we just turn that up? This is BRE 405554. And it's page 2 that we want. Now, this is the second edition of BR135 that was dated from 2003. Does that look familiar to you?
I think I saw the previous edition, to be honest.
The first edition,
Yeah.
did you? Okay. Well, this was the second edition. I just want to run through a few passages in this guidance to see whether you were aware of some of the concepts it's referring to.
Sure.
Now, on page 7, there's a reference to and a picture from the Garnet Court fire. Do you see that there?
Yeah, I see that.
It was a multi-storey block in Scotland, and there was a fire in the summer of 1999. Now, I think you said earlier that you weren't aware of any high-rise cladding fires prior to Grenfell. We can see this one is dealt with here. So would that suggest that maybe you didn't read this document prior to?
Was this in the previous version?
We'd have to check that. We'll have a look at the first edition.
I mean, by saying that I wasn't aware, it doesn't mean to say there weren't cladding fires.
No.
So, no, I wasn't aware. It's a simple answer.
Yeah. On page 9, then, we get the mechanisms of rapid fire spread spelt out in a diagram.
Yeah.
And you see you've got rapid fire spread, restricted fire spread. Is that diagram or something similar familiar to you?
Definitely.
So do you agree that you understood that cladding systems can create the opportunity for rapid, unseen flame spread
Yes, yes.
and for flame spread to keep breaking back in as the flames go up the tower block?
Yes, definitely. Hence
Yeah.
the need for compartmentation.
Yeah. Then on page 10, under paragraph 3, and under the heading cavities, I just want to look what's said under cavities. It says, if we pick it up in the third line, it says if flames become confined or restricted by entering cavities within the external cladding system, they will become elongated as they seek oxygen and fuel to support the combustion process. This process can lead to flame extension of 5 to 10 times of the original flame lengths, regardless of the materials used to line the cavities. Do you see that there?
Yes, yeah.
And it may enable fire to spread rapidly unseen through the external cladding system. Now that concept there of flame elongation of 5 to 10 times,
Yeah.
were you aware of that kind of information?
Yes, I always knew that as chimney effect.
Chimney effect.
Yeah.
So you knew that was a risk
Yes.
in the design of tall buildings.
Yes, yeah. Any building.
And again, on that page, under paragraph 5, if we go to the bottom of this page, it warns there that if we look at the second half of that 4 lines down, where the external cladding system is contributing to the fire propagation rate, the potential exists for the fire to affect multiple stories simultaneously, thus making firefighting more difficult. Again, were you aware of that?
Yeah, I was aware of it, but it seems a nonsensical statement because you shouldn't be using cladding systems that contribute to the fire.
Yeah. I see. On page 17, under the heading System-Specific Details, Ventilated Cavities, do you see that in the middle?
Mm-hmm.
In the third paragraph down, it says, once the fire is within the cavity, it may propagate unseen through the system if adequate fire barriers are not employed. This may result in significant risk of system collapse or fire breakout at significant distances from the fire origin.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And so this guidance warned that close attention should be paid to the installation of cavity barriers.
Yeah.
You can see that in the
Yeah.
paragraph below. And then if we go immediately below that, performance of materials in fire, we see insulation. It says, the performance of insulating material when subjected to this type of fire scenario has been outlined in the previous section. Typically, non-combustible materials are used in these systems as it is difficult to prevent fire entering the cavity and spreading through the insulating material. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, were you aware at the time of the Grenfell project that typically non-combustible materials were used as the insulation in such systems?
Yes. Yeah.
And what would you take that to mean, non-combustible materials? Can you give us an example of that?
Well, certainly rock wool, but the implication was that the PIRs were suitable also.
Well, we'll come on and look at what was said about the PIR in a moment. Now, just at the bottom of this page, under the heading External Panel, it's got a heading there, non-combustible materials and materials of limited combustibility. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah.
were you aware that there was a distinction between materials that were non-combustible and those that were limited combustibility?
Yeah, yeah.
You were?
Mm.
But I thought you'd said that you weren't aware of that there was a technical meaning of limited combustibility.
No, but it's quite clear. This is either non-combustible or it's limited combustibility. That's just language, isn't it?
And again,
You're asking me if I knew the particular materials.
Well, because it says as defined in tables A6 and A7 of approved document B.
Yeah, no, I don't know which materials were which.
No. And then if we look at the top of page 18, and it's still in this section headed external panels, there's a discussion about metal panels. And just picking it up in the fourth line up from the bottom of that section, it says metal panels such as aluminium may fall from the system if the strength of the fixings is affected by the local fire source. They may also melt, generating molten metal debris if exposed directly to the sustained flame envelope. Do you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, did you understand that about metal panels such as aluminium?
Well, normally the fixings would be stainless steel, which
I
wouldn't
see.
melt.
But did you understand that they might melt, generating molten metal debris if exposed directly to the sustained flame envelope?
It's saying there that the metal panels may fall if the strength of the fixings is affected, not the panel.
Yes, but in the next sentence, it says they may also melt, generating molten metal debris if exposed directly to the sustained flame envelope.
Oh, I see, yeah. Yeah.
Do you see that
I
there?
agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, the guidance that was available in terms of BR 135 for the majority of the period of the Grenfell refurbishment, and certainly during your time on it, was the third edition of BR 135.
Right.
Now, this is, if we can bring this up at CEL 403364. So that's the third edition. It's by Sarah Colwell and Tony Baker. Do you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
Does that front page mean anything to you?
That looks more familiar, to be honest.
more
Yeah,
familiar.
yeah.
So do you think it might have been this version of
Maybe,
the guide
yeah.
that you saw? Yeah. Now, if we go on, sorry, can we just look at the first few pages of this? If we just scan through the next few pages. Yeah, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. No, don't worry, I'll look for it overnight. But let's pick it up at page 11, paragraph 2.1. There's a discussion there about the building regulations in the first paragraph, and that the regulations and supporting guidance set out acceptance criteria in the next paragraph. And then it says this: these potentially conflicting requirements are highlighted in the area of innovative materials and designs, which are being driven by the need to construct more energy efficient and sustainable buildings. In order to meet these design challenges, the range of new and innovative materials and designs of systems being offered as potential solutions has also increased. The volumes of potentially combustible materials being used in external cladding applications. Do you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
So would you agree that this guidance is warning and drawing attention to the rapid development of new products on external walls
It appears to be, yes. Yeah.
containing potentially combustible materials?
Yeah.
Was that something you remember being aware of, either as a result of reading this guidance or more generally in the industry?
Now, as I said before, this was a document I would have flicked through to look for guidance when we were discussing cavity barriers. But no, I would definitely not have read it in that detail.
And if we can look at another part, on page 22, under paragraph 6.4.1, under the heading insulation. So it's in the bottom half of that page. there we go. We see 641, performance of materials in fire insulation. And it says this: as it can be difficult to prevent fire entering the cavity and spreading in these systems, the selection of the insulation materials used and the design of the fire barriers to close these cavities are particularly important. Do you see that there?
Yep, yep.
Again, were you aware that there was guidance such as this warning that the selection of the insulation materials to be used was particularly important?
Well, we know from ADB that all the materials, it's important to select those materials properly. So I don't see this as anything groundbreaking.
I see. So you don't think this was adding to what you'd been told by ADB?
No.
But just to be clear, I think you said you weren't familiar with paragraph 12.7 of ADB on insulation. Is that
I was
right?
never reviewing the materials.
No. And then just one more reference in this document. If we look at 641, staying with page 22, under the heading External Panels and Finishes. It's that last paragraph there, beginning combustible panels are typically, it's at the bottom right-hand corner of that page. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And if we can read that, it says combustible panels are typically based on vinyl or glass reinforced plastic. Although various new products are being developed in this area, some of which also contain insulation materials. These products generally have good surface spread of flame characteristics to prevent rapid fire spread across the surface of the system. But once the panels become involved in the fire, they have the potential to generate falling debris, add to the overall fire load, and provide a route for fire to propagate up the outside of the building. Do you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, were you aware of that guidance there, that various new products were being developed, some of which are containing insulation materials? So this is under the heading External Panels and Finishes.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that?
I was aware there were new products, but I wasn't aware that we were necessarily using anything new that hadn't been certified as safe.
Were you aware that some of these new products generally have good surface spread of flame characteristics, but once they become in a fire, they have the potential to generate falling debris, add to the overall fire load, and provide a route for fire to propagate up the outside of the building? Were you aware of that?
No.
No. Now, in terms of other guidance documents, if we look at paragraph 50 of your statement, this is HAR 30-10419, page 13. So if we look it's in the middle of that page, paragraph 50, you say, I recall consulting the following when considering the requirement for cavity barriers. And you've put 1, approved document B, 2, the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes, part 6, fire performance. 3, CWCT technical note TN73, fire performance of curtain walls and rain screens. And 4, the Siderise technical literature for RH and RV cavity barriers. We see that there.
Yeah.
So you clearly told us what you consulted there when considering the requirement for cavity barriers. Did you ever consider these documents in respect of any other elements of the external wall design?
Not at all, no.
Not at all. If you looked at them when you were considering the cavity barrier requirement, why not look at them more generally in terms of the external wall?
We seem to have a lack of guidance on cavity barriers. There seemed to be doubt from the performance of the barriers. So, as a matter of diligence, I sought some further information and really didn't get very far.
Yeah. So that's because a specific issue had come up on the project,
Yeah.
which you needed to drill down further into.
That's right.
So that caused you to look at these documents.
Yeah. Normally, I wouldn't concern myself.
And in the course of looking at them, did you consider them more generally in terms of what they were telling you about external walls, combustible materials?
It was specifically looking for guidance on cavity barriers,
Right.
and none of them really Well, they conflict each other.
Right. The BCA, the Building Control Alliance, were you familiar with that organisation?
Not at the time, no.
No. Can I just show you a piece of a guidance note produced by them? If we go to CEP 3057294, this is Technical Guidance Note 18. It was issued in June 2014, so just a few months before you were engaged on the Grenfell project.
Yeah.
Now, looking at that now, does that help as to whether or not you might have been familiar with that document at the time or read it at the time?
No, definitely didn't see that.
Can we just look at just a couple of pieces of this guidance?
Of course.
Underneath key issues, if we scroll down the page, we see in the beginning there that it talks about fire spread via the external wall medium is exacerbated by the use of combustible materials and extensive cavities. We've looked at that already. And then if you look 2 paragraphs down from that, it starts, a surface spread of flame classification does not refer any resistance to combustibility. It is solely a measure of the surface, the spread of a flame across the surface. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, was that something you were more generally aware of at the time, that a surface spread of flame classification didn't refer any resistance to
Yes.
combustibility? You were aware of that?
Yeah, yeah.
So does that mean you were aware that Class 0 didn't tell you anything about the combustibility of the product?
Yeah. True.
You knew that?
Mm.
And then it says thermosetting insulants do not meet the limited combustibility requirements of ADB B2 table A7. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Was that something you were more generally aware of?
No, never considered.
No. And if we go to the second bullet point there in that same section, it says the BR135 BS8414 tests deal solely with the spread of fire once it's entered the cavity. Hence, the requirements for cavity barriers in accordance with Section 9 of ADB are required in all cases, including around openings in the facade. Do you see that there?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Now, were you aware more generally that cavity barriers were required around all openings in the facade?
I was aware that in some instances this was a requirement, but through various routes to compliance, I understood there were it wasn't always applicable.
So you understood through different routes to compliance, you didn't always have to provide cavity barriers around the windows?
That's correct, yeah.
What route to compliance would you be following not to include cavity barriers around the windows?
I didn't have question to doubt the architect's drawings.
Does that mean that you'd been involved in some projects prior to Grenfell where cavity barriers hadn't been included around the windows?
Yes, yeah.
You had?
Mm.
Which project
Yeah.
was that?
Below 18 metres, though.
Below 18 metres? But which project was that?
That would be the Devonshire Church in Brighton.
I see. Given that your experience was predominantly in curtain walling and glazing, would it be fair to say that you hadn't had much experience of cavity barriers in cladding systems prior to Grenfell?
That's true.
Yeah. Now, there's a later edition of this BCA guidance from June 2015. We just look at this, CEL 402347. This document is dated June 2015. Can you see that at the top right? So it came out during the time you were working on the Grenfell project. Again, is your evidence that you weren't aware of this and didn't read it?
No.
do you see, if we go down under key issues again, and we look at that last paragraph beginning a surface spread of flame classification, we can see in that first bullet point that it's given more examples in brackets this time of thermosetting insulants which do not usually meet the limited combustibility requirements. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we see that polyisocyanurate has been added and is in there.
Yeah.
Now, I appreciate you didn't read this guidance, but were you aware of an issue to do with whether or not polyisocyanurate insulation could be used in buildings above 18 metres? Were you aware that that was an issue that you needed to be alive to?
No.
No?
No, I wasn't aware, no. I'd not read this document.
So I think you'd said you'd used mineral wool on previous projects, is that right, as the insulation?
Yes, yeah.
Had you ever used a polyisocyanurate
Not on
insulation board?
Not on a building over 18 metres.
What about a phenolic insulation board? Had you ever used that previously?
Oh, I don't know the difference.
You wouldn't have known the difference?
No.
And then, in terms of the CWCT, now, you've told us in your statement that you did consult some of the CWCT guidance when you were looking at cavity barriers on the project. Can we look at CWCT Technical Note 73, which is one of those documents you refer to? This is at CWCT 5019. So can you see that there? Technical Note 73, fire performance of curtain walls and rain screens.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And we know, I don't think it's on this document, but that it was dated March, it came out in March 2011.
Okay.
And we know this is one of the documents that you looked at. Now, at the bottom of page 1 and over to page 2, if we can just look at that. We can see under the heading Building Regulations, I want to pick it up in the third paragraph. It says, in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, materials may be described as non-combustible, and then if we go to the top, of limited combustibility or class naught, using definitions given in ADB. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Do you remember reading that at the time you were involved in the Grenfell project?
Not specifically.
Were you aware that this was drawing a distinction between class naught and limited combustibility materials?
Yeah, it appears to be, but again, I wasn't selecting materials, so it was not on the forefront of my focus at this time.
Now, moving on to page 4, under the heading Cavity Barriers in rain screen construction, in the right-hand column. Do you see that there?
Mm-hmm.
It says this, fire and smoke spread in rain screen cavities is particularly dangerous as it may be more rapid than on the outside face of the cladding due to the creation of a flue, and it may be undetected by building users or firefighters. It is therefore often necessary to incorporate cavity barriers in rain screen cavities to limit the spread of fire and smoke. You see that there?
Yes.
So that's a general statement.
Yeah.
And then right at the end of that column, under regulations, it says this, for rain screen walls, ADB requires that cavity barriers are provided, and if you then go to the top of the next column, and it says there, to close the edges of cavities, including around window openings. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, you've said that you did consult this guidance at the time you were considering the requirement for cavity barriers. Do you remember noticing that it talks about closing the edges of cavities around it window openings?
Not specifically, but I knew at the time I was looking for some more guidance about cavity barriers around windows and such.
does that mean, is what you're trying to say, that you were looking for some very specific guidance about the rating for cavity barriers?
That's right, yeah.
And is it your evidence that therefore you weren't concentrating on anything more general about cavity barriers? Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, the architect showed the cavity barriers which we replicated. And there was talk about cavity barriers around window openings, and his details didn't seem to require it. It was at this time that we started considering, do we need this extra cavity barrier?
Okay, let's just take that in stages. So you say the architect showed cavity barriers which we replicated. I'm going to come back to that,
Yeah.
and we're going to look carefully at what the Studio E drawings showed and then what your drawings showed. So let's park that for the moment. But in the next bit, you say there was talk about cavity barriers around window openings. Can you just tell us when there was talk about cavity barriers around window openings?
Around the table at Harley.
And who did you have those discussions with?
By this point, it may well have been Ben, certainly Ray.
And can you help us as to what was discussed about cavity barriers around windows?
Only the broad requirement, whether there was a requirement, and it was deemed that the architect's drawings showed explicitly what was required, and our drawings were issued for him to comment upon, which he approved fully.
When you say about the broader requirement, whether they were required, were you solely looking at whether they required looking at the Studio E drawings, or did you ever have a broader discussion about whether they were required under the regulatory requirements?
Now, because there's routes to compliance, the assumption is the architect may have come up with an alternative route to compliance, so as he only needed what he showed on his drawings.
When you're talking about routes to compliance, can you help us with what you mean by routes to compliance in the context of cavity barriers?
Well, there are different... this is a bit outside my sort of field of expertise, but the architect had the use of a fire consultant, and they must have considered this cavity barrier design.
Yeah.
Now, between them, they must have considered this design to be compliant. The last thing the architect wants is to say, oh, I forgot to put cavity barriers around the windows, and then the subcontractor would be asking the client for more money because they've not provided these items.
I see. Putting aside for a moment what the architect did or did not show on drawings about cavity barriers, were you aware at the time of the Grenfell project that there was guidance, such as the guidance we're looking at here now from the CWCT, which indicated that as part of the regulatory requirements, is under the heading Building Regulations, one was required to close the edges of cavities, including around window openings? Were you aware of that?
Yes, yeah.
If you were aware of that, did you never think to say when you were having discussions with Ben and Ray, well, I know they're not shown on the drawings, but there is guidance?
Yes, well, on the 3rd of March, we started an email trail querying the whole scope of the cavity barriers.
I see. So you think that was enough in terms of flagging that you
Yeah.
needed guidance on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But did you ever say to Studio E or Ryden, by the way, there aren't cavity barriers around the windows, but there is guidance that suggests there should be. Why don't you have another look at that? Did you ever say that?
Maybe not specifically, but there was many emails regarding this.
Yeah. Now, in respect of combustible materials, this piece of guidance, if we look at page 6 under the heading Use of Combustible Material, in the second paragraph, this piece of guidance says to satisfy the recommendations in ADB, insulation and filler materials in walls of a building with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level are required to be of limited combustibility. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
When you looked at this piece of guidance for the purposes of checking on cavity barriers, do you know whether you would have read a section on the use of combustible material?
I don't recall, to be honest.
You don't recall. And then if we look on page 6, right at the bottom of that column, if we can just move the page up. So immediately above the heading, alternative approaches, there's a paragraph beginning the only commonly. Do you see that there?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it says the only commonly used insulation material that will satisfy the definition of limited combustibility is mineral wool. It is sometimes argued that thermoset insulation materials with non-combustible facings may be regarded as satisfying the requirement, noting that their decomposition in fire will release smoke. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Do you know whether that was something you noticed at the time?
No.
That it's telling you the only commonly used insulation material that would satisfy the definition of limited combustibility is mineral wool?
No, no,
You didn't look at that?
no.
And then at the top of the right-hand column on page 6, it says there, where testing is carried out in accordance with BS 8414, the test applies to the complete cladding system, including insulation, rain screen flashings and cavity barriers. Changing any of these components may affect the ability of the wall to resist the spread of fire. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Was it ever suggested to you on the Grenfell project that a BS 8414 test was relevant to the insulation materials that had been selected?
That was way above my remit. I was given the materials that we were going to be used. So there was no need for anyone to discuss this sort of thing with me.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think that would be an appropriate moment for a break.
Right, well then we'll have a break now. Mr. Lamb will have a break now. We'll come back at 3:30.
Okay.
Please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything
No.
relating to it while you're out of the room.
Okay.
And you go with the usher, she'll look after you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Right, 3:30, please. Okay. Yes, would you ask Mr. Lamb to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Lamb, ready to carry on?
Yes, yes.
Very good, thank you. Yes, Ms. Green.
Yes, thank you. So just to quickly go back, we looked at the third edition of BR 135, the 2013 edition. If I can just pull that up again, CEL 403364. Do you remember seeing that this afternoon? And you said that
Yes.
that might well have been the version you were thinking of
Yeah.
at the time that you read. And then I was kind of fumbling around at the beginning trying to find some images of previous cladding fires that I thought I'd seen, and I've now had some help with where they are. So if we go to page 9, we can see here we have a fire that's being highlighted called Knowsley Heights. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And in the text above, it's talking about the Knowsley Heights fire in 1991 in Liverpool. Do you see that there at the bottom of that first column?
Yeah.
During this period, a fire occurred in a refurbished block of flats in Liverpool. Suggested that a full-scale fire test method was necessary to fully understand the overall fire performance of the complete system. Do you see that there? And then at page 10, over the page, there is a picture relating to the Garnet Court fire in Irving. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, I think you told us you weren't aware of any domestic cladding fires.
No.
So does that mean that if you read BR 135, you perhaps didn't look at these early introductory sections of it?
I scanned through it. I didn't read it. I was looking for some kind of diagram that could help me out
Yeah.
placing cavity barriers.
Yeah.
So it would have, I would have passed over it.
Okay. Now, just finally on guidance, before I turn to some more detailed questions about the drawings on Grenfell, another piece of guidance that you do say in paragraph 50 of your statement that you consulted when you looked at cavity barriers was the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes, part 6, fire performance. And that was from 2008. If we can just pull that up, CWCT 5046. There it is. And it was this standard that I think we saw was mentioned in the NBS specification. Do you remember?
Yes, yes.
Now, I just want to look at just one part of this on page 14. And I want to look at clause 6.4.4.2, little 2, right at the bottom of that page. In the black text, you see it says there, cavity barriers shall be provided to close the cavity around penetrations through the rain screen for windows and doors. Do you see that there?
Yes, yes.
So consistent with the other CWCT guidance that we saw, we can see it's making clear that cavity barriers should be provided around windows.
Yeah.
And again, my question is, were you aware that that was something that was said in this piece of guidance?
Not specifically, no.
So if you'd been asked at the time, is it a requirement to have cavity barriers around windows in rain screen systems? What would you have said?
I had a hunch that it was required.
Yeah. Okay. So now a different topic. I want to ask you about some of the design work on the project, and we're going to come to a detailed run of questions about the process for approving drawings on the project. So let's turn up paragraph 20 of your witness statement. This is HAR 30-10419 at page 5. And I just want to read what you say there in paragraph 20. You say the key aspects of the external facade design came from Studio E drawing 127906110 revision 00, proposed typical bay plans, section and elevation, dated the 24th of September 2013. This drawing showed what the architects wanted to achieve, specifically the panel and window layout, location of gaps or grooves, sloping sills and recessed joints on the columns. It also provided proportions for the external facade. It had been decided prior to my involvement in the project that the cladding was going to be cassette and that ACM was the material to be used. Do you see that there?
Yes, yeah.
Can we just turn up that drawing? This is at HAR 3010447. And if we could just blow that up a little. So this is that drawing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, earlier in your evidence, you said that the information you got from Studio E was very detailed.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by something like this?
Yes, yes.
You regarded this as very detailed, did you?
Yeah.
I would suggest that this isn't, in fact, very detailed, and that on a project like this, you ought to have had drawings, including 1 in 5 drawings, showing, for example, the detailing around the window.
Oh, you're dead right, but it was uncommon for that level of detail to come out of an architect.
I see. So is it your evidence that, yes, it would have been best practice for the architect to be providing you with something more detailed?
Yes.
But compared to what you often got in other projects, this was actually quite good. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, if you zoomed in on a PDF, you can zoom in and you can see a considerable amount of detail.
Now, if we zoom in on the proposed section, typical bay, actually, sorry, we are going to need the offline version of this. Sorry, I should have said that. It's my fault. There we go. So if I can zoom in on the top right-hand proposed typical bay.
Yeah.
Is that the offline version? My memory is we have a better... Sorry. Now, what I was wanting to show you, maybe I just explain while we're waiting. What I was wanting to show you is that I think in the offline version you should be able to see that in the labels on the right-hand side, annotated H92, it says zinc cladding
Yeah.
in these drawings. Do you remember noticing that?
Yes, but I was told we were not using zinc as per the drawing. It was to be ACM.
I see. So does that mean that didn't affect your work in any way? You just carried on designing but with a different material?
That's correct. Yeah.
I see. Can we now then look at HAR 3010423 at page 3? This is an email from you dated the 22nd of August 2014. So 10 days after you've been appointed on the project, copied into... So it's to Simon Lawrence at Ryden, copied into Daniel Anketell-Jones, Neil Crawford, Bruce Soons. And you say, Simon, please find attached some preliminary drawings to prove the basics of design and set out prior to us producing a full design package. It would be useful for us to discuss these principles at our meeting on Tuesday morning. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Can you just help us as to what you meant by prove the basics of design and set out? What did that mean?
Things like the depth of cladding zone, the placement of windows, the size of the window relative to the opening in the wall, and joints in the cladding maybe. Without seeing the actual drawings that were attached, I couldn't be sure, but it's so that we could do some full design on the main carrier angles, which were going to be the long lead time items.
I see. Yeah.
So if you could say, yeah, this is roughly it, then we could develop those as a point of urgency.
I see. And cavity barriers weren't on those basic drawings, were they?
No, no.
Would it be usual to leave those items until much later?
They weren't part of the lead time risk.
I see. So was your design and the progress of your design to some extent driven by the lead times for fabrication of the components?
Definitely, yes.
And would that be normal in your experience on a project?
Yes, certainly on a large project, yeah.
Can we also then turn to another email around this time, HAR 30010417. And this is an email from you, this time to Daniel Anketell-Jones, 29th of August 2014. And what you appear to be doing in this, you've attached certain drawings. You appear in this email to be asking him to look at certain drawings. You say in the second sentence, the only drawings that really need your consideration are, and then you've given some explanation with some detail about what you want him to look at. Do you see that?
Yes.
There. And then after 305, two-thirds of the way down there, you say, I just want to get these basic principles wrapped up before steaming into the rest of the detailing. Do you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
So is it right that at this stage we can see you working with Daniel Anketell-Jones as assistance and supervision in order to get the basic principles of the detailed design right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And would establishing these basic principles ever extend to any discussion of the composition of the cladding system and its compliance with the building regulations and other relevant guidance?
Not from me to him, no.
But from him down to you, would you anticipate that there might be comments back from Daniel which would pick up issues relating to the building regulations or relevant guidance?
If he felt there was obvious departure from compliance, then I'm sure he would. Yeah.
Yeah, and you would have expected him to have come back to you. Yeah. So now the process for approving or signing off on drawings, can you just explain to us in general terms the process by which drawings were issued by you and then checked and signed off by either Studio E or Ryden? Can you assist us with that?
Okay, well, normally drawings, the first issue of drawings would be developed around the table with the Harley design team, the technical team. I would go away, I would produce those drawings, and then they would be issued to Ryden's and also to the architect for comment. They would be copied in to the rest of the team at Harley for comment at their leisure. And then we would expect a response from Ryden's or from the architect giving us marked up drawings with their full comments on.
Now, what did you expect the architect to be doing when drawings were issued to the architect during that process?
Check everything for design intent, compliance. It's his design. We need to be compliant to his design.
So you expect the whole thing to be being checked by the architect?
That's right, yes.
And when the architect comes back, and we'll look in a moment at the stamp that this architect was using, but if you came back and there were no comments, what did you think that meant in practice?
It's fully approved.
Fully approved?
Yes.
Approved for construction?
Yeah.
Would there be a separate procedure with Ryden, the building contractor, in terms of them approving the drawing?
No. Sometimes they made comment, but that was very rare. I think Studio E were working as their agent as far as commenting on drawings.
Would you agree with me that Studio E as an architect couldn't be approving drawings for construction? It could only be the main contractor approving for construction?
That's a contractual point between Studio E and Ryden's.
I see. as far as you were concerned, if you got approval by the architect, was there a need to go through a separate checking process with Ryden?
No, because all the drawings were issued through Rydens and copied to the architect.
I see, yeah. Now let's look at an example and just follow through some drawings. If you can bear with me, it's a bit fiddly, this, but
Okay.
and if we can turn to SEA 3012756. This is actually an email to begin with. And if we look at the email at the bottom of page 1 and over onto page 2, we can see that you send a drawing at 11:04 to Simon Lawrence. We see Simon's name at the bottom there. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then over on the top of the next page, please find attached revised type 10 windows now with symmetry as requested. Please approve and forward your official instruction for us so as we can proceed with remakes of those in manufacture. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So in this example, you are addressing the email to Simon Lawrence at Ryden and asking for his approval. You've copied it in to Neil Crawford and others, yes?
Yes, just bear in mind this isn't the normal route for comments.
Yes, that's what I'm going to ask you in a moment, whether this was an exceptional case.
Yes.
Okay, let's follow this through, but
Sure, yeah.
I take the point. So if we can go up the email chain on page 1 now, we can see that Neil Crawford then responds, "Hi Kevin, please see attached comment." Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, so let's just turn to what Neil Crawford then attaches. This is at SEA 403093. So on this drawing here, we've got some red annotations.
Yeah.
To your understanding, was that Mr. Crawford's handwriting there?
Yes,
And he's
yes.
put better to hinge this way as per sketch of email 13th February 15. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've got the Studio E architect's stamp
Yeah.
on the right-hand side there. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah. Status B.
And he's given it status B, which we think reads conforms to design intent, subject to incorporation of comments, revise and resubmit for category A status. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, was it your understanding that if the drawings had that category B status, they did have to be resubmitted after incorporation of Mr. Crawford's comments?
Not immediately. I think what is meant by status B is you can read this drawing as a status A as long as you incorporate all of the comments that he's put on that drawing.
Where did you get that from? Who told you that that's how you should read status B?
That is how the industry actually reads that. Have you got a more legible copy of that stamp?
I'm sure we can find one.
Because I think it does say something to that state.
Well, we think it says conforms to design intent subject to incorporation of comments. And then it says revise and you can see resubmit for category A status. Do you see that in the second? It's got 2 sentences.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking you why you didn't understand that you had to revise and resubmit it and get category A status. So I think what you're saying now, and I think what you're saying in your witness statement, is that in practice, when you'd got the B,
Yeah.
you interpreted that as the green light to go, provided
correct,
you
yeah.
incorporated the comments.
Yeah.
Ms. Granger, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think
Yes.
you may have a message about the transcript.
Oh, I'm sorry. Apparently the external transcript has stopped working.
My first question is yours working?
Mine is working, yes.
Mine's running too. I don't know, council's running? Yours has stopped. Oh, that's interesting.
Okay.
Is yours running? I wonder if we could look into this because it's quite important for the people who are not in the room. And Mike, have you already?
RTS been informed, technical
Okay.
All right. Are they able to give you any idea of how long it might take to resolve it? Yes, all right. Ms. Grange, I'm rather disinclined to keep going regardless.
Yeah.
Because
Should we take a short break?
I think that might be better. Mr. Lamb, I'm sorry about this.
That's fine.
We
That's
have
fine
a
by
very
me.
occasional technical glitch, as I'm sure you'll understand.
We're doing fine for time, so I'm not troubled if
Yeah, I think what we'll do is to have a short break now until it can be sorted out. So would you go to the usher, please? And
Of course. Yeah.
we'll tell you when it's been fixed. All right, thank you. We'll rise and
Thank you.
someone will no doubt come and tell us as soon as it's working
Thanks.
again.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, I understand that the problem has been resolved. So could you ask Mr. Lamb to come back in, please, and we'll see if we can get going again. Well, Mr. Lamb, sorry about that. Anyway, I think we're ready to go again for a bit.
Right.
All right? Yes, Miss Gringe.
Yes. So we were looking at this drawing, which Studio E have marked status B there. And I want to ask you now about the approved for construction, the black stamp that we see underneath the architect stamp.
Yeah.
You see that there? Who would apply that stamp?
I would.
And can you explain why you've stamped it approved for construction when you've issued it, but we can see that Studio E have then commented on it and marked it status B?
Because the drawing was issued for construction at revision E. Consequently, the architect decided to make further changes.
I see. But are you saying that you'd had a status A before revision E?
Yes, yes.
And you'd assumed you'd got to the end of the chain and then you actually get a status B?
That's correct, yes.
I see. We'll check that. So are you clear that you wouldn't ever apply that approved for construction unless you'd got a status A?
Not intentionally, no.
Not intentionally?
No.
Is it possible that on the Grenfell project we might see some of examples of where you put approved for construction but it hasn't
I
got
think I've
status
spotted
A?
2 drawings so far that actually you're right on, yes.
Yeah, okay. And what was meant when it did get the approved for construction? What was meant by that?
It means that Harley can proceed with manufacture of this item.
I see. And I think we'll see an example in a moment. Sometimes what we see is a dotted stamp instead with issued for approval.
Correct, yes.
And was that the prior stage
Yes,
to this?
yes, exactly, yeah.
And were those the only 2 stamps you were using on the Grenfell project?
Yes, yes, yeah.
And the stamp issued for approval by who?
The architect.
Right, yeah.
Mr. Lamb, I can understand why you'd use a stamp saying issued for approval, because you're sending it out for approval, or at least for consideration.
Yes, yes.
But why is it your role to stamp it approved for construction and not Harley's role?
Because I'm the one being addressed with the comments from the architect.
Oh, I see. All right. Yes, thank you.
Now, if we go back, we were following the story of this drawing through. If we go back to SEA 12758, sorry, not back, this is a new document. This is a further email from you. Again, it's dated the 17th of February 2015. And it's you to Simon Lawrence, but CCing in Neil Crawford and others.
Yeah.
And then you say, Simon, the window mods are now approved by Neil as attached, so all we need now is your official go-ahead to proceed. Do you see that there?
Yes.
So you do seem to be addressing this to Simon Lawrence and asking for his official go-ahead to proceed. Do you see that there?
That's right, but as mentioned before, this isn't normal. This particular drawing was approved for construction at revision E, and those items went into manufacture.
Right.
So for the architect to make changes at this late stage meant potential costing or programme delays. So that's why it was more important to address it to Simon. He was the one that had to authorise costs and programme delays.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think the transcript is playing up again.
Just about to tell you that.
Yes.
Yes.
I can see it.
Is yours
flashing? Mine's flashing and keeps coming back and forth.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we're doing fine for time, so I am happy to say we could stop today and pick up again tomorrow, rather than having another break and coming back.
Yeah. Are you confident that you can finish Mr. Lamb's evidence tomorrow?
Yes, I am.
Stop now.
Yes, I am.
Well, Mr. Lamb, it may be that this is a case for the early afternoon, because my transcript's playing up, and I think others people's are as well. So I think we'll take that opportunity. Call a halt for today. I have to ask you to come back for some more questions tomorrow. We'll sit at 10 o'clock for that purpose.
Okay.
Again, please don't talk to anyone overnight about your evidence or anything to do with it.
Yes, I understand that.
All right?
Mhm, no
And
problem.
we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.
Right.
Right, thank you very much. Will you go with the usher?
Yep.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Grange, we'll call it a day there.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.